Hello, everybody. Marhaba. I've waited so long to say that greeting. I am so delighted to be with you here today and to have this opportunity to speak at an event that introduces to Canada formally the study of Palestine. It is my pleasure and my honor to share with you a story that I was asked to share this evening. And that is the story of my family and some of the lessons that I have learned since coming to Canada. And I do that humbly in the hope that one or the other, or perhaps both, resonate with you in some way. And with the knowledge that today is about conversations and starting conversations in the places where they should be happening. And that is our Canadian universities. And so I thank you all for being here tonight. And I am so honored to be the inaugural speaker for the Foundation of Palestinian Studies. I want to start by saying that my heart goes out to Indigenous peoples in Canada. We heard the land acknowledgement earlier, and thank you very much for that. Our Indigenous peoples are facing systemic violence almost every day in this country, and we must honor the promises that were made to our Indigenous brothers and sisters, and work towards justice and reconciliation for Indigenous peoples. And personally, I have benefited and received many learnings from my Indigenous friends and colleagues, and I know that many of you feel the same. So let's start all our conversations about reconciliation in Canada, Turtle Island, by acknowledging that we have been unjustly enriched by their losses and working within our institutions, especially our academic institutions, to right those wrongs. So as I've already suggested, I'm going to speak to you today simply in my capacity as a Palestinian Canadian, someone who's worked in legal circles for decades, and someone who with their family, experienced some of the beautiful opportunities and some of the challenges that face Palestinian newcomers in the West. Ultimately, what I am trying to do, and have been trying to do for decades in my career, is to work within a justice-seeking, a community-engaged, and a people-centered ethos to, inshallah, help nurture hope in a new generation who are committed, I believe, and who I hear from every day in my classrooms, who are committed to the equal dignity and worth of all peoples. And in my journey, I seek to learn from all along the path. So, in the Arab world, as some of you may know, gratitude is a language unto itself. May Allah bless the hands that gave me this gift. You did the most and didn't limit your kindness towards me, and so on. The Arabic language gives us an infinite array of poetic words to express our gratitude and our appreciation. And coming from such a culture, a mere thank you somehow seems inadequate. But even in Arabic, I don't think that I can fully convey my gratitude to the people behind the Foundation for Palestinian Studies, those of you who have worked tirelessly to make this historic opportunity come to life. Can people hear me at the back, or I'm feeling like the mic is being lost? Can people hear me at the back? Yeah? It's better? Okay. Thank you so much, Shaki. So I'm deeply, deeply grateful for this gathering, which celebrates the launch of an institution that celebrates Palestinian history, identity, culture, and accomplishments. And many people in this room, both here and online, have taught me so much and opened my eyes. And many continue to support me in my journey. I'm blessed to be surrounded by friends and family, colleagues and community throughout my journey to becoming Canada's first Palestinian law professor and eventually the first Palestinian law dean in the country. Thank you. The title of my talk comes from the fact that I have often said that anything good in my life can be traced back to the kindness of strangers. When my family first immigrated to Canada in 1967, it was a nun from the prairies of this country who sponsored us to come here and leave the war-torn Middle East. Arriving in Montreal with 2 children and $50 in their pocket and nowhere to go, my parents were advised to board a train and head to Ontario because my father's English was a little bit better than his French. I was carrying a very large doll, the only childhood thing that came with us to Canada. And the doll's name was Abdallah. A name that I now realize was an overly serious name for a child's doll. But perhaps Abdullah's grand name was appropriate to the grand and serendipitous role that he played in my family's history. Abdullah caught the attention of a family from Hamilton, Ontario, Mr. and Mrs. Williams. They were also on this train, and they were heading to Toronto. And they started a conversation with my father, who was the only person in our family who spoke English at the time. And some would say still the only person. When Mr. and Mrs. Williams realized that we had nowhere to go, that we were on this train bound for nowhere, and that we had nowhere to stay, they said, "You're coming to stay with us." And showing no fear, they took us into their home. Total strangers on a train. Their unbridled generosity meant that I grew up not too far from here in Burlington, Ontario. I was 3 when my family arrived in Canada, and we spoke Arabic at home. And by the time kindergarten came around, I spoke virtually no English. And I remember running home from school to study my alphabet so that I would not be left behind by my classmates. What would our lives have been like without those random acts of kindness from Sister Mary Rose and Mr. and Mrs. Williams? I doubt very much that our family would have had the stability that allowed me to pursue my studies. We lived in poverty for most of my years growing up, but we had friends, and we had a public school system. And throughout my younger years, Mr. and Mrs. Williams and other families would come visit us. They'd give us emotional support. And so we never felt that we were financially poor because we were surrounded by the kindness of people who were no longer strangers in our lives. I never studied or learned about Palestine in school. There simply were not any opportunities to do that. And my family was not what you might call a political family. We savored Palestinian food and Palestinian traditions, but I was largely left on my own to discover Palestinian history and to learn about the conflict that had brought me to this land in the first place. Eventually, 4 university degrees later, in 2002, I became the first Palestinian law professor in the country. And from that perch, I was honored to create a program that brought Canadian and Palestinian judges together to think about how to advance human dignity in the administration of justice in Palestine. And this remains one of the most meaningful personal and professional opportunities of my life. Some of Canada's top judges and top diplomats came to my aid in putting the program together. And we worked, the University of Windsor and Birzeit University, together for 7 years. I got to witness firsthand how hard Palestinians struggled under occupation in the hope that they could create institutions that would sustain a better future. And frankly, I look back now and I realize how deep and steep the odds were that were stacked against us. I learned that even the best efforts can be undermined by those who benefit from an unjust status quo and from the international community that can tolerate injustices. But I also saw the power of ideas in action. And that is what's so powerful about this gathering today. I saw Palestinian judges, not all of them, of course, but a core group who were committed to Palestinian self-determination. And they drew a connection between the ideas of human dignity and their own decision-making and their own action. And they understood that if they wanted freedom, equality, dignity for Palestinians as a people, then they had to give that freedom, that equality, that dignity to the small child or the abused woman who was standing before them, and they had to do that even if nobody was watching. And so it was from a small group of Palestinian and Canadian judges that I learned of the transformative potential of the concept of human dignity. So when I was appointed Dean of Windsor Law under a year ago, I made a commitment to pursuing those values because they were, after all, I believe, the same values that motivated two strangers on a train to take in a family. Now, maybe life was easier for Palestinians and Arabs who arrived in Canada around 1967. My father managed to secure a job in a few weeks because the economy permitted him to do so. And so much has changed over the last 5 decades for Arabs and Palestinians in Canada. In 1967, the community as a whole was relatively small. And the scholar Baha Abu Leban estimates that between 1961 and 1970, an average of only 2,884 Arabs were allowed to come into Canada annually. But Canada now has a beautiful, growing, and diverse Arab community as Arabs continue to be among the fastest, if not the fastest growing immigrant population in the country. And our Arab diversity is reflected in a multitude of ways, from our different countries of origin to our cultural traditions, to our different religions, and our social markers and backgrounds, such as our gender identities, and yes, our political views. Highly educated, entrepreneurial, and hardworking Arab Canadians, including Palestinian Canadians, have contributed to this country for almost a generation and a half, with Baha Abu Leban telling us that the first Arab arrived in Canada in 1882. I now call Windsor, Ontario, my home. And Windsor is, as many of you may know, also home to a thriving Arab community that have helped shape this country for the better. They, as in Waterloo, have contributed to things like healthcare, our education system, our entrepreneurial environment, research, art, the economy, and more. As a whole, as a group, Arab Canadians have the highest levels of education in this country, yet they consistently also have one of the highest unemployment rates. In 2020, for example, one study reported that this rate hit 17.9% compared to a national unemployment rate of 9%. And Arab women are among the worst off. So unfortunately, our reality is that racism, discrimination, bullying, anti-Arab racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and other forms of oppression continue to be present in Canada despite our treasured multiculturalism and our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And unfortunately, anti-Palestinian racism is normalized both here in Canada and abroad. Our families, friends, and communities live in fear. On Nakba Day, May 15th of this year, Palestinians around the world marked 74 years of dispossession, displacement, and ongoing trauma. And most recently, thousands of Palestinians mourned the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh. Like all Palestinians, when I heard about Abu Akleh's killing, I was devastated. She was a hero to millions of people throughout the Middle East and beyond who regularly followed her reporting. May her soul rest in peace and in power. Advocating for Palestinian human rights and combating anti-Palestinian racism, or APR, carries with it unique and unusual risks in Canada. Consider, for example, that in a case called Ahmed and Canada, commitment to the Palestinian cause was equated with and offered as a test to determine whether one had a propensity for violence. But despite the risks, there are those who continue to insist that Palestinian voices must be centered, prioritized, and taken seriously by both governments and private actors. And the term anti-Palestinian racism is fast becoming part of the Canadian lexicon. And I recommend to you a report by the Arab Canadian Lawyers Association about this subject, which analyzes APR as it manifests across Canadian institutions and also offers a framework for action. So countering both persistent racism and misrepresentation of Palestinian culture is a vital part of building the more inclusive society of which we all dream. And I'm so grateful to the University of Waterloo for supporting the Foundation for Palestinian Studies, the first of its kind in North America. That is remarkable. This initiative offers a much-needed step for our community that is often left behind in human rights conversations. So thank you to the University of Waterloo. As I hope my remarks have emphasized and has already been suggested, Palestine is not simply an international issue. It's also a domestic issue. And some of my research tries to shed light on the experiences of Arabs and Muslims in Canada after 9/11. As part of my work, I read decisions by human rights tribunals across the country, and I try to understand the experiences of those who claim discrimination and to also assess the capacity of the human rights system to respond to such discrimination. And unfortunately, my overall conclusion is that the human rights system may be failing just when we need it the most. One more reason why we need education and the type that is offered by the Foundation for Palestinian Studies. Let me just give you one story as an example. This is a story that will never leave me about a Palestinian-Canadian computer engineer who made what is now clearly, but he did not know it at the time, a bad decision to visit New York in 2001. After his visit, and after the attacks of September 11th, everything that he did was retroactively turned into an evil act. Everything, every innocent thing that he did. I'll give you an example. When a coworker offered him a chocolate bar during Ramadan and he said no thank you, his coworkers after the attack said, "Oh, he must have been purifying himself to participate in those attacks. Why else did he go to New York?" When his roommate left, moved out of his apartment, simple roommate leaving an apartment, that became a sinister and unexplained disappearance. His conversations with his family in Arabic, marhaba, how are you, but in Arabic, were viewed as evidence of suspicious plot making. His willingness to work overtime was taken as an indication that he was using company resources and computers to further violence. His coworkers reported him to the RCMP, who interviewed him as a possible 9/11 suspect, not once, but twice. And almost overnight, he went from a valued friend and colleague to someone who was shunned and mistreated and mistrusted. And he was eventually fired. But a human rights tribunal that looked at his case did not see the stereotypes and how they played out in his experiences in the workplace. And in my view, the tribunal diminished his experiences as a Palestinian, and they in fact applied a higher and different legal standard to him than have been applied to other cases. So why am I sharing this story with you today out of all of the stories that I have read in my decades of studying the law? Well, this story emphasizes to me the need for better understanding of the Palestinian people, of their traditions, of their beliefs, of their relationships, and the kinds of consequences, the very serious consequences that can flow when that understanding is lacking. It may surprise some of you to know, but not, I suspect, the Palestinians or the Arabs in the room, that when I've spoken at events like this in the past, someone inevitably approaches me at the end and tells me in a very hushed voice that, as one person put it, I am a secret Arab. I've even heard these hushed confessions from judges. And over the years, I've come to learn that it's not unheard of for members of the legal profession to hide their Arab identities, and especially their Palestinian identities. I'm not to judge. Maybe their calculations have been wise ones, maybe they're misplaced, but they're calculations that few Palestinians are spared in at least engaging in their heads. And this takes me to the observation that the foundation for Palestinian studies is not simply creating a space to study Palestine and Palestinians. It's creating a space where the next generation can feel pride in their identities and in their communities when they attend universities in Canada and beyond. And significantly, now is the time, because the majority of Palestinians and the larger Arab community are overwhelmingly young, and many of them will be voting for the first time in this upcoming provincial election. They're going to make an increasing proportion of students in our classrooms and our institutions of higher learning. And my sense is, I've seen a change over the years. They are calling to be understood and represented within these institutions. They do not wish to hide. And so with that in mind, I offer 4 observations, suggestions, lessons learned, calls to action, however you would like to describe them, that come from my experiences. And the first is that to promote an understanding of Palestinians, we have to foster solidarity in our human rights work. Many Indigenous, Jewish, Black, queer friends, colleagues, comrades stood with me in my lowest moments of my career. And without them, I would not have succeeded in however I may have succeeded. Please continue to build allies among your networks. Solid relationships are key. Second, remain committed to the power of education for our communities. We are fortunate to have leading Palestinian thinkers in our communities who educate about our experiences and our struggle around the world. Let's recognize them, know them, and continue to ensure that our children and youth have access to scholarships, to research, and to experiential learning opportunities that reflect their experiences and who they want to be. Third, please include Palestinian voices when working on Palestine. And fourth, please let's not give up hope. As Palestinians, we are so tired of grieving. But I believe that the struggle for human dignity and freedom will prevail. I do have hope. I have hope when I look around this room full of leaders from every community and every part of the country gathering to celebrate our culture and our history. I have hope when I see young Palestinians flocking to law schools and places of higher education to speak without fear, and sometimes despite it. I have hope when people of all backgrounds, Canadian citizens, newcomers, Indigenous, Black, Jewish, and other communities stand in solidarity with us. Solidarity and love for Palestine and Palestinian people as members of the human family exists. When I was named Dean of Windsor Law last year, the expressions of congratulations from our alumni, members of the legal profession, students, colleagues from around the world, and from total strangers were overwhelming. I had to put my out-of-office notification on for 2 weeks simply to respond with thank you. And it wasn't an Arabic thank you even. That would have taken 6 weeks. And it was an honor, of course, to do so. But I also know that despite the fact that individuals like myself have been lucky and privileged with supportive friends and colleagues, when we look at the demise of Palestinian self-determination, and when we look at the ways in which Palestinian human rights are violated, it is hard to have hope. But as the great Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish says, it's hard to speak of hope at this time. That would look as though we were ignoring history and the present, as though we were looking at the future in severance from what is happening in this moment. But he goes on to remind us that we must look for hope in the most unexpected places, in the perseverance of nature, for example. And he also reminds us that we have no choice. Even if there is no hope, we are obliged to invent and create hope. In order to live, we must invent hope, even if we have to invent it out of nothing through our own strength of will and character. Thank you. Sincere shukran to the Foundation for Palestinian Studies for creating that hope for us today. This thank you is not enough, but it is extraordinarily sincere, and I am so grateful to have been part of this historic moment. Thank you.